Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Okay, today's video is going to focus on connecting the dots and trying to help my audience, especially the younger people in my audience, understand the FTX debacle. And we're going to do that by focusing on things that occurred in my lifetime, but before the young viewers were born. And this is going to be an example of how history and understanding real history, not fake history, but real history, by understanding that you can come to grips with the fraud, deception, concealments that are going on in today's COVID generation, which is also being conducted under Admiralty law, also known as maritime law, which is martial law, which is the rule of ultimatums, not the rule of law. There are no laws. There's, I am the captain of the ship. I am the master of my vessel. And as long as we're at sea, which is virtually everywhere behind me that you can see, we're at sea. As far as you can see, like the Holy See of the Roman Catholic Vatican City, the Holy See operates under maritime law. The Roman Catholic Church, a Swiss banking facility, operates under maritime law. Why would you think that FTC, Wall Street, the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, Goldman Sachs, Jim Cramer, CNBC, Fox Business News, why would you think they operated on anything other than maritime law? Okay? Because that's it. The rule is do what I say and be quiet. And that's how it is if you've ever been in a criminal courthouse or a courthouse for a civil litigation, which rarely ever sees a courtroom. It's usually done in lawyer offices in a conference room, and the public is not invited. And by the way, if you do realize that the courthouse is off limits to the public too, right? And that was true before the COVID face diaper metal detectors were installed. Before that, it was off limits. They always have a clerk of the court and a representative of the district attorney's office to, with a clipboard, to go around and ask all the nosy people who showed up at 8:30 in the morning to be led into the courtroom, which nothing happens before 9 o'clock in the morning. So you got 30 minutes to take inventory. Who's there? Why are you here? Are you a witness? Are you a family and friend of the victim? Are you a family and friend of the defendant? Who are you? And if don't fit into one of those categories, they will invite you to leave the courtroom. And if you don't, the bailiff will escort you out. Because it's not open to the public. And especially it is not open to the media. And I mean the social media, because the general mass media is not interested in the truth. And they don't cover criminal cases. They only cover CIA operations. So the very fact that FTX is on television is your first clue that it is a CIA psychological operation. And you can base it on the amount of hours that are spent on it as to the importance in your psychological health. And so whether it's the O.J. Simpson trial, which was covered 24/7 for about a year, or whether it was the Charlie Manson Mendacity fake trial, which was covered for about 6 months, mostly in fake magazines like Vogue, Esquire, Time Life, and fake newspapers like Los Angeles Times, New York Times, Washington Post, CIA newspaper, Washington Post. They're not even trying to hide. And so everybody knows that's a CIA newspaper, right? So the thing is, they're all CIA newspapers, but some are more obvious than others. But the thing is that they bombard you with all this disinformation, because not a damn thing you're going to hear on television, and nothing you're going to hear out of Jim Cramer's mouth is going to be remotely having to do with anything that's honest or truthful. He's reading a script, or else he'll get yanked off of his television job. They will terminate his salary. I don't know if he needs a salary or not, but he's in a paid gig. So he doesn't prepare his material, people. He does not prepare his material. All right, so you notice if you want to know the truth, it's what they don't report. So you don't hear Sequoia Capital mentioned anywhere in the FTX story. I wonder why that is. I mean, gee whiz, aren't they sort of like a world-class, successful venture capital private bank, right? Didn't they create Apple Computer? Didn't they pluck Steve Jobs out of De Anza College, community college in Campbell? Didn't they find him at Atari working on children's video games? And then they pluck him out of De Anza Community College and make him the president of Apple Computer, which becomes a $1 trillion monster into the stratosphere above where altitude is where I am. And that was brought to you by Donald Valentine, who founded Sequoia Capital in 1972. He created Apple Computer. He created Cisco Systems. And once he wires over some money, hundreds of millions of dollars, or in the case of FTX, Sequoia Capital in 2019 wired over $213,500,000 of love over to the Sam Bankman Fried scam. They take total charge. I can assure you that Sequoia Capital is adult supervision, and they're a little bit beyond adult supervision. If you don't obey exactly what they tell you to do, they will change the security code, lock you out of the building, confiscate your files, repossess your cell phone, and kick you to the curb. That's what they did with Cisco Systems' two founders, who owned 40% of the company after working with Sequoia Capital and Don Valentine. They kicked them to the curb, okay? And then that company went on to be, the single most important company in the internet, up there with TRW and Lockheed Martin, who monitors everything that's on the military-industrial internet, and other companies who are subcontractors. But my point is that if Sequoia Capital is wiring money over to your organization, they're in control of who works there, what their wardrobe is. They have to approve your wardrobe. So if you notice the wardrobe that Sam Bankman Fried is wearing on some of his media appearances, that's exactly like Susan Atkins at the preliminary hearing and again at the murder trial. And the wardrobe of Linda Kasabian was purchased by Joan Didion, formerly of Vogue magazine. So you have the media buying wardrobe for defendants and witnesses who appear on television in theatrical events known as psychological operations, which we call psych ops. That's what a psych ops is. It's a psychological event. People may or may not be murdered in a psych ops. In the case of FTX, as far as I know, nobody has died yet. However, people have lost money. So losing money is a form of being harmed, right? Just like, being murdered. That's a form of being harmed also. So in the Manson trial, they tried to associate that with Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger, even though there is zero correlation. There's nothing to connect Abigail Folger, who's a private banker for CIA, and Sharon Tate, who's a CIA operative in social engineering, whose father is in Army intelligence and counterintelligence terrorism operations, and has been involved with counterterrorism his entire life, making him a terrorist himself. In other words, he's a terrorist to the resistance forces, much in the same way that the Sacred Heart Convent Catholic order is too. They were born in the French Revolution to support the banks against the pesky peasants who didn't trust the banking system. That's the history of the Society of Sacred Hearts. So if you know anyone that works there, or you know students who have graduated from them, they've been indoctrinated in a military counterintelligence operation. And they have offices at 2222 Broadway in Pacific Heights, San Francisco, in close proximity to where the Pelosi's live, in close proximity to where Enos Mejia lived, who is the mother of Abigail Folger. And that is where Melvin Belli, the attorney that made damn sure that Jacob Rubenstein, Jack Ruby, was convicted of murdering Lee Oswald, a CIA operative. And that is in close proximity to the infamous hammer attack that never happened, with Paul Pelosi at 2640 Broadway. So you got Pelosi's have a home on Broadway. They also have a home on Pacific Avenue, one block up the hill, with 4 garages for cars, for cars that you wreck, like Porsche Carrera 911s. Anyway, Pelosi's have a home on Broadway. Sacred Heart Convent has a massive mansion facility, Academy on Broadway. Enos Mejia, private banker for CIA in Haight-Ashbury, had a home on Broadway. Dianne Feinstein has a home on Broadway. She attended the Sacred Heart Academy. Melvin Belli had a home on Broadway. Those are 5 CIA-related people. If you're a member of the United States House of Representatives and you're the Speaker of the House, you are completely and utterly sheep-dipped by the CIA, okay? And if you're a senator at age 89, United States Senator from California, named Goldman, but go by Feinstein, you're sheep-dipped with the CIA. If you were the mayor of San Francisco, you're sheep-dipped in the CIA, just like Joe Alioto was, just like George Moscone was, whom Dianne Goldman Feinstein took over and got her gig from. Once George Moscone was done away with by a United States trained Manchurian candidate, Dan White, 6 years in the United States Army, has a few psychological problems maybe, and then he gets basically acquitted due to the Twinkie defense. I mean, he spent a few years in jail. I think he spent maybe 5 years in jail. But the point is, he got out, and then he was mysteriously suicide murdered in his garage, if you believe that story. Anyway, that's a CIA supervised city. And that would include Dianne Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi. That would include Paul Pelosi, who came into prominence as soon as Enos Mejia was sort of retired from service when they murdered her daughter on August 9th, 1969. That's when Paul Pelosi was returned to San Francisco. It's right around then. That's when the Zodiac killings happened, right? That's Paul Stein, Presidio Heights, Presidio Army Base. That's where Sharon Tate's father lived and worked. That's where St. Ignatius Parish is. That's where University of San Francisco is. Lone Mountain Campus for Women Jesuits is. That's where St. Agnes Parochial School Elementary is. That's where Patricia Hearst had 2 safe homes in that Haight-Ashbury neighborhood for over a year, when the FBI and the CIA and the San Francisco police and the Berkeley police are searching for a kidnapped victim, Patricia Hearst, and she's living walking distance from Nancy Pelosi's house, and nobody can find her. It's a CIA operation. That could never happen in real life unless it's deliberate on purpose, right? And the FTX meltdown could never happen in real life unless it's deliberate on purpose, that Sequoia Capital sends $213 million over to Sam Bankman in 2019, and then 3 years later supervises the pulling of the plug, because I guarantee you there isn't going to be any Chapter 11 bankruptcy paperwork filed in the District of Delaware without Doug Leone, the managing director of Sequoia Capital, who's worth over $6 billion as an employee/principal. This character, $6 billion man, would have to give permission for the lawyer to send the paperwork in for a reorganization bankruptcy for FTX. That cannot happen unless Sequoia Capital authorizes it. Cannot. I'm just telling you, I've studied the Cisco systems. I've studied the Apple. They brought Google to life. They brought YouTube to life. They brought Zoom to life. They brought RSI Logic to life. They know that Stanford University campus like the back of my hand, okay? And that is where most of these clown actors, these crisis actors, they get them from Harvard. They get them from University of California, Berkeley. They get them from University of California, Santa Cruz, Angela Davis. You might have heard of her. You might have heard of Huey Newton, the head of the Black Panthers. Yeah, he's an alumni of University of California, Santa Cruz. Don't you get it? That these people you see on television, they're acting. They're actors. They're not in charge. Huey Newton didn't run the Black Panthers. The CIA ran the Black Panthers. Angela Davis doesn't run communism in America. The CIA runs communism in America. Hell, we're working under maritime law. I would call that a totalitarian form of government, right? Do as I say, not as I do. That's totalitarianism. That's the system. We're not under communism. We're not under capitalism. We're not under cronyism. We're under military, maritime law, and we have a lot of crisis actors who appear on television or are celebrated in fake books and fake magazine articles written by people like Joan Didion or her husband, John Dunn, who worked for Time Life, whose older brother was Dominic Dunn, right, Dominic Dunn from Vanity Fair, who told you everything you're supposed to know about the Menendez trial, except he forgot to mention that Jose Menendez works for the CIA and is in the pornography business in San Fernando Valley, but before that he worked for RCA Records and was a chief operating officer, and before that he was chief financial officer for Hertz Rent-A-Car, which is a major job, and before that he was in the intermodal transportation container smuggling business in Cicero, Illinois, in Al Capone's neighborhood, and he was the controller and then CEO, president of an intermodal transportation company in Chicago, Illinois. So Dominic Dunn, for being a researcher for Vanity Fair, he leaves out the most important facts and circumstances that might get you to think that maybe Eric and Lyle Menendez did not kill their parents. They had no motive to do that. They didn't really have any means to do it because they have not been connected with any murder weapon whatsoever. There's lots of hearsay and this and that, but there's no murder weapon. There is no direct link. There's no link that links Charlie Manson to Sharon Tate. There's no link that links him to Abigail Folger. There's nothing to link Charlie Manson with Lena LaBianca, who's a military policeman for the United States Army and the owner of 6 grocery stores and the owner of 11 racehorses. Now, it was 9 at the day he died because he sold one horse and the other one they had to euthanize, put down because it broke its leg because, you know, horses are doped and raced and they're harmed. All right, so anyway, to get back onto track is that the FTX story has clandestine fingerprints all over it. And if you want to know what happened, you need to study Doug Leone of Sequoia Capital and study the Bronx and study Fordham University and study Mount Vernon, New York, and New Rochelle, New York, which is where the founder of KKR came out of, because KKR and Sequoia Capital are Siamese twins. Sequoia came first to Menlo Park, to Sand Hill Road. Sequoia was number 1 with Don Valentine, a graduate of Fordham University from the Bronx. Then 4 years later, Jerome Kohlberg came from New Rochelle, New York, and Bear Stearns. And he brought 2 of his Bear Stearns alumni with him in 1976, and they formed KKR Venture Capital Private Equity Group. And since then, since 1976, KKR and Sequoia Capital have partnered in many financial transactions or piggybacked. They like to pretend that they're not associated and affiliated, but they both use the 2800 Sand Hill Road address for their corporate headquarters. So I do realize that they have offices in Manhattan and they have offices throughout the whole world. Shanghai, Hong Kong, London, England, etc., etc. Probably Geneva, Switzerland. I'm assuming they're both in Geneva, Switzerland. Home to the WHO, the World Health Organization, and Lake Leman. Lake Leman, the world, right? The world, New World Order. Geneva, Switzerland. Yeah, the last stop for Roberto Calfi, who was the elite banker for the Holy See, Bank of Vatican, and Propaganda Due for Freemasonry. The last stop he did before he got murder-suicided with an orange rope with a love knot in the center of London was Geneva, Switzerland, to empty out his safety deposit box. And there's a lot of action going on there in Geneva, Switzerland, people. So what you should know is that when you look at the cases on going back into history for you younger people, you might remember the O.J. Simpson case. You might remember the McMartin preschool case. You might remember the Rodney King, Los Angeles Police Department beating of Rodney King that unfortunately for them was caught on video. You may or may not remember the Jose and Kitty Menendez double murder with 12-gauge shotguns shot 13 times in a living room of a home that did not belong to them, a provisional home for the clandestine services that was previously occupied by Michael Jackson, who lived in this house, 722 North Elm Drive, Beverly Hills. This was home to Michael Jackson, you know, the king of pop. This is the home to Elton John. Remember Elton John, right? Elton John? Goodbye, Norma Jean. Didn't he do a song on the Yellow Brick Road? I forget. Anyway, Elton John lived in that house. And then Jose and Kitty Menendez lived in that house for a couple of months at the most. Then they were murdered in that house. And then once they cleaned it all up, guess who moved in? William Link. Yeah, the executive writer and producer of my most favorite detective show, Columbo. The producer, director, screenwriter, William Link, moves into the Kitty and Lyle Menendez house. Now that's a cult ritual, people. In other words, that's a CIA murder. And then William Link, who is producing CIA approved content in the form of Frank Columbo, aka Peter Falk, who plays the detective who never arrests the scapegoat but always hones in on the true killer, which is a completely unrealistic show because you see in my stories, the only people that get arrested, arraigned, and convicted or murdered are the scapegoats. The real killers go free. In real life, the real killers go free. So if you're concerned about justice on your FTX fraudulent scandal, you're not going to get it, okay? Because they are not going to arrest Doug Leone, and they're not going to arrest the principals from Sequoia Capital or SoftBank. None of the founders of FTX are going to be arraigned, arrested in any way, shape, or form. And that's who committed the crime. They committed the crime. They created the fraud. And they authorized the destruction of it. They gave birth to the baby, and then they murdered their own baby. And yes, it took out a lot of innocent, greedy people who were, no offense, stupid enough to invest in that thing. Okay? You're going to listen to Jim Cramer? I mean, how Jim Cramer said to invest in that thing, right? You trust that guy? I mean, then, you know, you're not very smart. You're not very smart taking advice from a television talking head, indoctrinated at Harvard University, and then taught how to skim money where they put lipstick on pigs and present them as Arabian racehorses. Goldman & Sachs, merchant banking. That's Jim Cramer's background. Put a lipstick on a pig and tell you that it's an Arabian racehorse. Perhaps Lino LaBianca would buy it. Except I don't think Lino LaBianca was unsophisticated that way, and I don't think he would buy a Goldman & Sachs racehorse. I don't believe so. All right, so when you think about McMartin Preschool and Rodney King and the Menendez case, guess what judges come into the picture? Stanley Weisberg, a novice, just getting out of the novice class, and he's assigned the McMartin Preschool case, which is an extremely complicated case, and he botches it, and that case goes on for 6 years, and there's a mistrial, I think 2 mistrials, and Stanley Weisberg is like the least experienced Superior Court judge in Los Angeles County out of 500 judges. Why would you assign the beginner guy to a case like the McMartin School? And in real life, you wouldn't. But in the CIA-controlled world, you would. Because it's a psychops. It's not really about the truth at all. It's about frightening families to bring their children to preschool. Because they'll be molested, right? The Rodney King case was LAPD ganging up on a black guy and beating the crap out of him with their clubs, their billy clubs. And so what did they do in that case? Well, Stanley Weisberg moved it to a different county, to Ventura County, up past the Spawn Ranch and past the Corrigan movie set, on up there near Oxnard Way. And they had the trial up there, which meant everybody had to stay, get provisional housing in Ventura. So that case basically acquitted all but one of the police officers, the one who actually did most of the hitting. It was a hung jury on him. So the DA didn't retry him, so he got off. He wasn't acquitted, but they just dropped the case. The Menendez trials couldn't have happened without Lance Alan Ito's involvement because he presided over the indictment of Lyle and Eric Menendez, age 18 and 21, and allowed them to be put into trial. And they were presided over and assigned to Stanley Weisberg. So Stanley Weisberg was the inexperienced judge of the McMartin School scandal, which resulted in nothing but acquittals over a 6-year period. Rodney King, which resulted in basically no harm, no foul, even though Rodney King got beat up. No one was convicted. And then the Menendez case, they convicted the wrong people because it's professional killers who entered a CIA-controlled house that Michael Jackson lived in, that Elton John lived in, that Jose Menendez, they want you to believe he lived there when he has an 11-acre ranch in Calabasas in West Hills that they're remodeling, 8,000 square foot home. Why would he want to live in Beverly Hills, which adds 25 minutes to his commute to Canoga Park and to Woodland Hills, which is their porn offices, where he works with Noam Bloom, the brains of the pornography outfit, which is, by the way, if you haven't figured out, that's a CIA business. Pornography, that's CIA. And Jose Menendez is the chairman of the board and the executive vice president of a porn company called Live Entertainment, whose number one asset is Caballero, means gentleman in Spanish, home video, which is owned by Noam Bloom, who sold his company to Oliver Stone's partners, Mario Casar and Andrew Vajna, who lives in Holmby Hills, but his real name is Andres Weidman. And Oliver Stone's real name is Oliver Silverstein. See, there's a lot of people that change their names in my stories. And porn is CIA. Jose Menendez came out of Havana, Cuba in 1959, along with Jose Perdomo, the guy who ended up murdering John Lennon at the Dakota in New York City on December 8th, 1980. December 8th, 1980, John Lennon was shot by a professional killer named Jose Perdomo. And he also has 5 other aliases that he runs by. But he was a chief of police in Cuba under the Batista regime, and then remember the communist who grew up in Havana, Cuba, and attended University of Havana, Fidel Castro, who's working closely with CIA operative Frank Sturgis, not his real name, Frank Fiorini. Jose Perdomo and Jose Menendez both leave Havana in 1959 and then go on to have long CIA careers, okay? And Perdomo partners with Frank Sturgis, who goes on to be associated with the John Fitzgerald Kennedy assassination in Dallas. And my intel says Frank Sturgis is the one that pulled the trigger on the flangeable bullet, which blew John Kennedy's brains back onto the trunk of the car where Jackie, when the limo was parked, and then Jackie could then, in a pink pencil skirt, climb up and grab her husband's brain, the size of a softball, and put it in her pocket, and then hand it to the doctors at Parkland so they could put it back into her husband's head. Of course, he's dead, right? So it doesn't really matter. But anyway, Frank Sturgis was definitely, according to a number of witnesses, in Dallas that day. So whether he pulled the trigger or not, we'll never know. But the point is, he was involved with operators involved with the John Kennedy assassination, and he was involved with Jose Perdomo with the training of men for the fake Bay of Pigs staged invasion, which was a complete psychops. And Jose Perdomo then went on to, be involved with the John Lennon assassination. And they had an MK Ultra scapegoat by the name of Mark Chapman, who was there, but that's no different than Sirhan Sirhan being present during Robert Kennedy's assassination at the Ambassador Hotel, which was really performed by a Lockheed Skunk Works employee, Thane Eugene Caesar. when everybody's looking there, it's a magic trick, right? It's what they do at the Magic Castle on Franklin Avenue. While your eyes are averted, then they pull the bunny rabbit out of the hat. But there's no bunny rabbit in the hat. That's just an illusion. You know, it's like I committed the perfect murder. And as Frank Columbo said, oh no. He said that to Jack Cassidy in a film that celebrated the Magic Castle on Franklin Avenue. Jack Cassidy, who played a character in Murder by the Book with Martin Milner, where his name was Franklin, right? Mr. Franklin. I'm going to come back to Martin Milner and his connection with Clint Eastwood and David Jansen at Army Fort Ord, Monterey, Spooksville, USA. Those three knuckleheads were all in the Army at Fort Ord, Spooksville, USA. Martin Milner, David Jansen, not his real name, he has a Jewish last name, and Martin Milner, Clint Eastwood, David Jansen. There they are at the swimming pool. Clint Eastwood was a lifeguard in the Army. He's a lifeguard during the Korean War. So they weren't in Korea. They were in Monterey. Living the dream, man. It's a nice place to be. All right, so Lance Ito was involved with the Menendez case with the indictments, which would have been a grand jury event, and he presided over that. And then he's associated with the O.J. Simpson trial, which was a complete CIA-controlled theatrical show involving, William Colby's son, Carl Colby. He's a witness at the preliminary hearing and then again at the murder trial. He's the son of the CIA director. So that's kind of a tell, right? When you have a murder trial and you have the son of a CIA director as a material witness, I don't know. Because I don't really trust the CIA, and I certainly wouldn't trust a CIA witness, right? And then we had F. Lee Bailey, right? He represented Patricia Hearst in her bank robbery conviction, so he didn't do a very good job for Patricia Hearst. She went to the same school that Sam Bankman went to, Crystal, Springs Reservoir School, Upland School. That's where Paul Pelosi wrecked his Porsche or his sports car when he was 16 years old, killing his older brother. That's where Charles Ng, serial killer of 25 people, went to school at the Notre Dame school, which is really close to the Crystal Springs Upland School. It's a CIA concentration. Patricia Hearst, Sam Bankman, Freed, Charles Ng, Paul Pelosi. That's four. That's four right there. Then I got Clint Eastwood, and I got David Jansen, and I got Martin Milner, those three. And they're at Fort Ord. And right walking distance from there, from Fort Ord, is the Dominican Catholic Boarding School Academy for Women. And that's Abigail Folger, right? That's Dr. Victor Ota's two daughters, Tara Ota and Lark Ota. And that's where Dakota Johnson went to high school until she transferred her senior year to the Santa Monica New Road School in CIA, Playa del Mar, where the fiery car crash that never happened with Ann Heche, where the Church of Synanon had an operation in an Army armory at the beach in Santa Monica, where William Holden was murdered in close proximity to Marina del Rey, where Natalie Wood was murdered at Santa Catalina Island on her Splendor, her yacht, the Splendor, 55-foot Splendor, docked at Marina del Rey. That's where the Lyle and Eric Menendez had an apartment at the Marina del Rey Towers, right there. It's where Dennis Wilson was murdered, Marina del Rey, in 12 feet of water, while he's diving into 55-degree temperature water on December 26th, at 4:30 in the afternoon. Are you out of your mind? The sun goes down at 5. It's going to be dark soon. You're not going to find any of your possessions that your 16-year-old cousin's daughter tossed into the water. You do realize that Dennis Wilson married Mike Love's daughter, who he's been dating since she was 16 years old, and he married her when she was 19 years old. Dennis Wilson, the drummer for the Beach Boys, whose older brother, Brian, is being controlled by his psychologist in Bel Air, near where, Art Linkletter lived at the time, near the Sharon Tate murder scene. That Brian Wilson, who wrote, supposedly, most of the music for the Beach Boys, supposedly. I mean, at this point, I don't believe anything. I don't think Paul McCartney wrote all of his music. I don't think John Lennon wrote his music. I think they wrote some, and they contributed to it. But I think they have professional songwriters as part of the Tavistock Social Engineering, Institute, and that they basically are a cover band. They cover other people's music. And I think that's what the Beach Boys were. I think that's what the Monkees were. I think that's what the Rolling Stones were. And I think that's what the Beatles were. I mean, you can't have that level of production by just being a couple of guys smoking weed and taking LSD that gets put into a bowl of soup and go off to see the Maharishi. You're too busy doing your press junkets. You can't be creative when you have all these media appearances. So somebody's got to do the writing and the melodies off camera. All right, so anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is that Lance Ito it's not a mistake that he was assigned the O.J. Simpson trial, which turned into a critical race theory psych ops event for CIA. I don't, and O.J. Simpson received Navy SEAL training just weeks before his wife had her carotid artery slit. So he was trained by Army or Navy intelligence, which is the same training that Ron DeSantis got. The fake governor of Florida. He's a fake governor. Just like we have a fake governor of California, Gavin Newsom. Just like we had a fake Ronald Reagan governor. Like we had a fake attorney general by the name of Evel Younger, who was the fake attorney general. And before that, he was the fake district attorney of Los Angeles County. And he railroaded Sirhan Sirhan, who didn't kill Robert Kennedy. And he railroaded Susan Atkins. And he railroaded Patricia Krenwinkel and Charles Watson and Leslie Van Houten. And he railroaded Charlie Manson, who didn't do it. They're innocent. They didn't commit any murders, no homicides. And the fake district attorney convicted them, along with the fake prosecutor, who was Aaron Stovich, not Vincent Bugliosi. And the attorney who is the single most important cog in the entire thing is a guy named Paul Caruso, who's basically a mob lawyer. He's supposedly a criminal defense lawyer, but he's a lot more than that. He's a promoter of boxing. He's involved with fixing boxing matches. He's a personal friend with Evel Younger, who, by the way, spells his name similarly to the Wicked Witch of the West. Evil. The Wicked Witch of the West is named Evil. Evel Younger is Evil Younger. The Wicked Witch of the East is Evelyn. But anyway, this is Hollywood laughing at us like, you're too dumb. You're too dumb to know. So before we had Stanley Weisberg presiding over cases where no justice was ever done, the McMartin preschool case is a disgrace. The Rodney King beating case is a disgrace. The Menendez double murders in Beverly Hills in a home that Elton John and Michael Jackson lived in and William Link of Colombo lived in, that is a disgrace. And it took 2 trials to get them convicted. And there was no police interest in the Menendez brothers. There was no police interest in the Charlie Manson family, which there was no Manson family. But there was no interest in Susan Atkins, and there was no interest in Charlie Manson, and there was absolutely no interest in Charlie Watson. So that was all put together in Paul Caruso's office through a machination, which I won't get into now. But anyway, Paul Caruso was the linchpin, along with the fake author Lawrence Schiller, who wrote The Killing of Sharon Tate, which was copyrighted on January 2nd, 1970. So before there was a Charlie Manson murder trial, 6 months before that, Lawrence Schiller, Pepperdine University, already told you who killed Sharon Tate. He knew it before the Los Angeles Police Department knew it. That's what kind of an author he is, right? He knows things before the police know them, because he's producing a CIA scripted fake book. So of course you can know. It's fake. Just like the news. Just like the story on FTX. That's a fake story. They trot out little Caroline Ellison. Are you kidding me? She looks exactly like Susan Atkins, to a T. And they dope her? Well, that's what they did to Susan Atkins. They gave her amphetamines too. They gave her LSD and amphetamines and probably electric shock treatments. I mean, she's in the same office building as Louis Jolyon West, who gave electric shock treatments to lots of people, along with Timothy Leary. And they're there. And then who was the last physician, medical doctor to see Jack Ruby before he went bye-bye? Well, it was Louis Jolyon West, who was there with Susan Atkins in San Francisco with Timothy Leary and Abigail Folger's mother. He killed a 3,000-pound elephant. In 1962, he killed an elephant at the Oklahoma City Zoo. You think that he didn't kill Jack Ruby, so you couldn't do an appeal hearing, right? Yeah, he did. He handled all the survivors from the Jonestown CIA operation so they wouldn't flap their lips and tell you what really happened, right? Louis Jolyon West, the head of neuroscience psychology for UCLA. That's right, I said University of California, Los Angeles. Louis Jolyon West. He was department head there for like 20 years. After his work in Oklahoma City, after his work in Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco. And there he is. And before that, we had the infamous Manson trial, which featured William Keene was the first judge. William B. Keene, who, by the way, is personal friends with H.R. Haldeman and John Ehrlichman. William Keene graduated first in his class at UCLA Law School, the very first law class. And he was assigned to the Manson case in 1970. And he had to go through the preliminary hearing process. And he actually granted Charlie Manson his Sixth Amendment constitutional right to defend himself in court. So that was the end of William Keene, right? You don't have the right to defend yourself in maritime law. I guess William Keene, for graduating first in his law class, he didn't realize he was studying fake law. He was studying constitutional law, which we don't practice. So William Keene, who goes on to divorce court and LA Law and a whole bunch of television shows, William Keene, he's more of a TV judge than a real judge because he doesn't know that it's maritime law. And Charlie Manson is not going to be allowed to defend himself. So they get him. His last lawyer was a homeless man, Irving Canarak, who lives in his car parked behind the courthouse jail. So Charlie Manson's lawyer lived in his car. So he was never late for court because he lived at the courthouse in his car. That's what you're dealing with. You think you're going to find out the truth about Caroline Ellison and Sam Bankman Fried? You never found out the truth about Charlie Manson or Susan Atkins, and they are do-overs. They are complete and utter do-overs. They are cut and paste do-overs. The hair, the wardrobe, everything is identical. All right, let me tell you about Hollywood and how they like to tell you how smart they are and how they like to mock you and hide in plain view. So Clint Eastwood, he grew up in Piedmont, California. That's where Abigail Folger's mother grew up. That's where Robert McNamara grew up, who went on to be the president of the World Bank, and the Secretary of Defense for John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. Executive Ford Motor Company and Price Waterhouse accountant and MBA from University of California School of Haas, where Peter Schiff got his MBA. That's where Robert McNamara, scratch that. He went to Berkeley for undergraduate and then he got a Harvard MBA. Harvard MBA. He's a disgrace. And Clint Eastwood went there, and he actually got thrown out for writing obscene remarks about one of the school officials, spray painted on the wall in Piedmont High School, so that he had to be transferred to Oakland Tech High School. That I personally attended that school. So Clint Eastwood went to a high school that I briefly attended. Things had degraded a little bit since when Clint Eastwood went there, but I was there and I almost got killed there. Anyway, Clint Eastwood and I went to the same high school. So Oakland Tech on Broadway. Then Clint got drafted into the Army, where he was assigned to Fort Ord to be a lifeguard, and that's where he met. David Jansen and Martin Milner, and of course, it's not David Jansen's real name. I really want to get these particulars correct because it's very deceptive how the CIA hides in plain view. All right, David Jansen. Folks, he was very famous. He did The Fugitive. His real name is David Harold Meyer. Meyer, that's a Jewish name. And he changed it to David Jansen to be a little bit more, I guess, marketable. He died at age 48 in Malibu. I said Malibu. That's an extremely young age to be dying, people. Of course, the media wrote it up exactly the same as they wrote up the William Holden death at age 63, that he was an alcoholic and he smoked a lot, so that's why he died. Jansen was a heavy drinker who smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day. How would Wikipedia know that? He died from a heart attack in the early morning. Yeah, but you could be murdered. You could be murdered by a heart attack, right? We have today, after the COVID situation, we have sudden death syndrome. So I think David Jansen died of sudden death syndrome, you think? February 13th, 1980. Now that's important because that set off a domino effect, because after David Jansen died, and by the way, guess who attended his funeral? It's the who's who of Hollywood, right? So Suzanne Plachette, from the Bob Newhart show and from a Columbo episode called Dead Weight, where they tossed a body into the ocean, just like Natalie Wood was tossed into the ocean, Susan Plachette was in a Columbo where dead weight was dumped in the ocean, but then the body floated up and they found the dead body worked for the United States Army in the procurement office, implicating Eddie Arnold, who was a general in the United States Marines. Anyway, Richard Harris attended the funeral. Milton Berle, who I've met. Johnny Carson, who I met. Tommy Gallagher, who I don't know. Richard Harris, I never met. Stan Herman. Rod Stewart, never met him. Gregory Peck, he went to UC Berkeley, I never met him. Jack Lemmon, George Papard, Jimmy Stewart, Danny Thomas. They all attended the David Jansen funeral, age 48, which was attended at a Jewish synagogue in Culver City, which is where Sharon Tate signed her contract with MGM and CBS through Filmways, and that is also where Ronald Reagan did his World War II duty, was at Culver City Studios doing war propaganda films at Culver City. And this is in close proximity to where the David Jansen funeral services were held. And Suzanne Plachette delivered the eulogy for David Jansen. Milton Berle, Johnny Carson, Tom Gallagher, Richard Harris, Stan Herman, Rod Stewart, and Gregory Peck were the pallbearers. They had honorary pallbearers, Jimmy Stewart and Danny Thomas, George Papard, and Jack Lemmon. They weren't needed, but they were in attendance to the funeral service at age 48. So that's a suspicious death. But it sets off a domino chain, because after David Jansen went bye-bye in February 1980, then we have the William Holden death in Santa Monica on November 16th, 1981 is when we found his body. Don't really know what day he died. And he was bottomless in a pool of blood next to his bed, conked in the head by a blunt force instrument, which they never found. And there's no furniture in his house that comports to the wound in his head. So somebody whacked him on the head and then left and made sure the door was locked, closed the door, and left his apartment tower in Santa Monica. Then 10 days later, just 10 days later, Natalie Wood's body is found floating, like at 3:30 in the morning in Santa Catalina Island, because she got tossed into the 55-degree temperature water like a bag of laundry or a sack of potatoes at age 43. William Holden was 63. Then 2 years later, Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, he drowns in Marina del Rey in 12 feet of water on December 28th, 1983. So that's four. David Jansen, 48 years old. William Holden, 63 years old. Natalie Wood, 43 years old. Dennis Wilson was 39 years old. And Thomas Noguchi, the coroner of Los Angeles, rules no murder, no homicide in any of these. And they all look like they're potential homicides. William Holden definitely was a murder. Natalie Wood was a murder. Dennis Wilson looks a lot like a murder. I can't really say it's a murder. David Jansen could have been a murder. Can't really say it's a murder. But it's weird. And it's also weird that Clint Eastwood knew David Jansen and Martin Milner, who stars in Columbo, and David Jansen stars in The Fugitive. And Clint Eastwood goes on to become famous by doing these Hollywood films. Okay? Play Misty for Me, released on November 12th, 1971. Okay? Which celebrates the Monterey International Pop Festival, which was June 16th, 17th, and 18th, 1967. Which was a concert that was attended by Meredith Hunter, a little black boy, age 15. He attended that concert in Monterey. It's right across the street from where Abigail Folger went to school. That's where Clint Eastwood referred to that in Play Misty for Me. Play Misty for Me, which he directed and starred in. Then, immediately, simultaneously, Dirty Harry is released on December 23rd, just 1 month later. December 23rd, 1971, Dirty Harry, which celebrates a mass serial killer murderer, a serial killer named Scorpio, which is patterned after the Zodiac, because we just had the last Zodiac murder on October 11th, 1969, and here, 2 years later, we have the Scorpio killer killing people in the city of San Francisco. And don't forget, people, we had in 1939, on September 8th, Charlie Chan at Treasure Island was released with Cesar Romero, who played a psychologist who finds out that there's a killer loose in the wealthy districts of San Francisco, calling himself the Zodiac Killer. So Hollywood celebrates the Zodiac Killer 30 years and 33 days before Paul Stein, age 29, a yellow cab taxi driver, is murdered in Paul Pelosi's neighborhood. Paul Pelosi, age 29, Nancy Pelosi, age 29, living in close proximity to a murder of the last Zodiac killing in Presidio Heights. Paul Pelosi, age 29, celebrated in the Clint Eastwood film Dirty Harry, renamed Scorpio. Zodiac to Scorpio, to scare movie viewers. I think it's more than bizarre that Meredith Hunter would be, during the Summer of Love, he lives in Oakland, he's poor. How can he get down to Monterey and go to a 3-day international pop festival? Who comped him, right? And then 2 years later, he's murdered by a bayonet in front of Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones on December 8th, 1969, to rock out the 1960s. After the Abigail Folger Sharon Tate murder, we had the Meredith Hunter murder by bayonet, by the sword. Operation Gladio means by the sword. It's Army Left Behind, but it's also by the sword. And a bayonet, don't make me say this again, a bayonet is a sword. It's a double-edged sword. And Meredith Hunter died by a bayonet, and Sharon Tate died by a bayonet, and Lena LaBianca died by a bayonet, and Abigail Folger died by a bayonet. I'm going to call it a banker's bayonet. And Meredith Hunter was present at the Monterey International Pop Festival, celebrated by Clint Eastwood in his Play Misty for Me. November 12th, 1971 release date. Summer of Love. The same summer that they murdered George Sullivan, who owned the Fillmore Auditorium, which Bill Graham took over. Wolf Krajonka, the Jewish fellow from New York City. All right, that's enough for today. I think what you should see, people, is that we have an enormous connection between William King, who was in the United States Army, and Ronald Reagan, and William Holden, who was Ronald Reagan's best man in his marriage to Nancy Davis, not a real name. Charles Older, who was the hanging judge in the Charlie Manson murder case. He was a USC graduate. He was a flying tiger, but he volunteered for the United States Marine Corps to go into the America Volunteer Group, which is a CIA OSS clandestine flying tigers. He was stationed in Burma, which is the opium heroin capital of the world at that time. And he was flying and shooting down Japanese planes before Pearl Harbor. That's the judge who convicted Charles Manson. Not his real name, Charles Scott. And what's disturbing is that that Charles Older, the hanging judge of the Manson trial, he was in the third pursuit wing, which was also called the Hells Angels. And that murder of Meredith Hunter at Altamont in front of Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones, that was blamed on the Hells Angels, which is the group that Judge Charles Older was associated. His pursuit wing of the American Volunteer Group, a private clandestine funded arm of the Marines, was called the Hells Angels. And the Hells Angels were blamed on the murder of Meredith Hunter, age 18, at the Altamont Raceway. You should know that the 21-year-old kid that they arrested and arraigned for that murder was represented by Melvin Belli, who lived on Broadway. You know, where Dianne Feinstein lived, where Enos Mejia, Abigail Folger's mother, lived, where Paul Pelosi's fake hammer attack was, where the Sacred Heart Order of the Convent, 2222 Broadway, that's where that school is located. Melvin Belli got this kid acquitted. So there was never a conviction in the murder of, there was no conviction in the murder of Meredith Hunter, a black boy dressed in a Dumb Dumber tuxedo with a white girlfriend in 1969 out there in Lawrence Livermore Weapons Lab property, which is where that is. That's Department of Energy zip code, people. The Altamont Speedway. I know, I race motorcycles there. I know that whole area. I've raced bicycles, raced motorcycles, all over that property. It's a really large piece of property. The Speedway isn't. That's why you couldn't have 300,000 people there. You could maybe get 5,000 to 10,000 people maximum on that property. The media said it's 300,000. Well, guess what? They lied. It's not true. It didn't happen. And the Hells Angels don't work for free beer either. That was also a mendacity. So Hells Angels is a clandestine service operation. The Black Panthers is a clandestine service operation. Church of Synanon, Process Church, Church of Scientology, those are all clandestine service operations. Tavistock Institute, clandestine services. Okay? I believe the Hare Krishna is also. And they all had offices in Haight-Ashbury. So I think that pretty much sums it up. Thanks for listening. Please hit the like and subscribe. Have a great day. Bye-bye.